that was the attraction. And, people think, oh, it was sex, it was this. Not at all. I never had sex with him. He was very kind, very soft, very loving, but he also respected the fact I was only 14 years old.
Everyone wanted to be Elvis, and every girl wanted to be with him. But what happens when the one who was with him couldn't bear to touch him? On stage, Elvis was the king, electrifying, untouchable. Off stage, he was guarded, complicated, and hiding something most fans would never guess. His love story with Priscilla Presley was sold to the world as a dream come true, the teenage beauty who captured the heart of the biggest star on earth. But behind the glitter, behind the headlines, the truth was quieter, stranger, sadder. Priscilla and Elvis weren't just a couple, they were a myth in motion, a symbol of American glamour. But real life? It didn't follow the fantasy. Their connection started early, grew fast, and quickly turned into something far from romantic. Something uncomfortable, even tragic. Because this wasn't a love built on passion. It was a relationship built on illusion, control, distance. How does a man who could have anyone end up emotionally distant from the one who stayed by his side? And how does a young girl, barely more than a child, fall into a world where she's both idolized and invisible? This story isn't just about fame, it's about what happens when love is confused with possession, and when a woman's real self is buried under the weight of a man's fantasy. If you're ready for more of Hollywood's untold truths, the stories they didn't want you to hear, make sure to subscribe, because today we're starting where the cameras never looked, inside the walls of Graceland. Priscilla Beaulieu was just a military kid. Her father had passed, her stepfather was in the Air Force, and they moved constantly. Germany was supposed to be just another stop, another year of being the quiet girl in the corner of someone else's high school. She wasn't flashy, she wasn't bold, she kept to herself. But that would all change with one surreal invitation. She was 14, just a ninth grader, and someone told her that Elvis Presley, yes, the Elvis Presley, wanted to meet her. Most people would think it was a joke, a hoax, but it wasn't. He really was stationed there, and he really did invite her to his house. Her parents were hesitant. Of course they were. But Elvis was charming, polite. He called them personally, promised everything would be proper, supervised, and so Priscilla went. From the moment she walked through the door, her life changed. Elvis wasn't just a star, he was a force, charismatic, magnetic, but also sad, moody, grieving. His mother had died just a year before, and the loss had shaken him. Priscilla, young, quiet, and gentle, reminded him of home, of peace. She wasn't loud or demanding, she just was. And for her, he was everything, a fantasy made real. The way he looked at her, spoke to her, treated her like she mattered. It was overwhelming. But even then, there were signs. Elvis didn't just want company, he wanted control. He asked her to dye her hair black, just like his. He didn't like loud makeup, only soft, doll-like features. He commented on her clothes, her walk, her voice. Slowly, subtly, he began shaping her into the image he wanted. To the outside world, it looked like a dream. But inside, it was something else. He was the king. She was the porcelain figure beside him, on display, untouched. As the months passed, they kept seeing each other. She'd sneak off to visit, sometimes for hours, sometimes overnight. Rumors spread, but Elvis denied anything inappropriate. Still, the age gap couldn't be ignored. She was still a child. He was 10 years older. But somehow the world turned a blind eye, because it was Elvis. When he returned to the U.S., they kept in touch. Calls, letters, promises. And after high school, she moved to Memphis, to his world. Graceland was a palace, and she, still a teenager, was expected to fit into it. Elvis set the rules. No going out, no friends without approval. She dressed the way he liked, kept her hair the way he liked, and lived in a bubble of fantasy. To the public, they were perfect. But behind closed doors, the cracks were showing. Elvis didn't touch her. Not in the way a couple normally would. He kept her close, emotionally and physically, but always at a distance. He'd kiss her, hold her, but never cross a certain line. For years, she waited, wondered, was she not enough? Did she do something wrong? But the truth was deeper. Elvis had a complicated relationship with intimacy, with women, with control. He once told Priscilla that he couldn't be with a woman who was a mother, that once a woman became a caregiver, the desire vanished. And he meant it. Even after they married, things didn't change. He had created her, mapped her life, shaped her image. But love? Intimacy? Those were never part of the plan. To him, Priscilla wasn't just a partner. She was an idea. The eternal girl he could protect, possess, and admire, but never truly connect with. And for Priscilla, that meant years of confusion, guilt, and silence. She couldn't talk about it. Who would believe her? How could she explain that the man who had everything, the women, the fame, the fortune, didn't want her the way she hoped? That behind the velvet curtains of Graceland, she was more alone than ever? And yet, she stayed. Because that's what young girls do when they're taught that love means sacrifice, that loyalty means silence. She believed in him, loved him, and hoped that someday, somehow, he'd open up, that he'd see her, not as an idea, but as a woman. But that day never came. When Priscilla finally moved into Graceland, it wasn't the dreamy fairy tale she'd imagined. Sure, the mansion was grand and Elvis was still the king of rock and roll, but this wasn't a love story where two people grew together. It was more like a set, a script, and Elvis had already written every line. Priscilla was there to play a part, and that part didn't allow her to speak up, grow up, or act out. From the very beginning, Elvis made it clear this relationship would be on his terms. Nothing was left to chance, and certainly not to Priscilla's own desires. Her wardrobe, he chose what she wore, favoring modest feminine outfits that matched his vision. Her makeup, he directed every detail, down to how much eyeliner she could apply. The people she saw, the friends she kept. Only if he approved, and when she expressed even the smallest sign of independence, whether it was an opinion, a request, or simply wanting a bit of space, it was quietly but firmly dismissed. Priscilla wasn't a partner in the traditional sense. She was being shaped into a symbol. Not of herself, but of him, his perfect woman. A reflection of an ideal that had nothing to do with who she really was. She became what he wanted the public to see. Flawless, poised, untouched. A living doll, displayed in luxury, admired by millions, but with no control of her own. Beautiful, yes, but silent. Adored, but controlled. She was 17 when she moved in, a teenager trying to find herself. But instead of discovering who she was, she disappeared into his world. Elvis was always surrounded by people, his entourage, his friends, his fans, but Priscilla, she wasn't allowed the same. Her life narrowed, her circle shrank, and soon the only person she ever really saw was Elvis himself. What's even more complicated is how he idolized her innocence. He didn't just want someone to love, he wanted someone to preserve, someone untouched by the world, and that meant distance, emotionally, physically. Even after they got married, intimacy didn't flow naturally. There was a wall, one she couldn't name but constantly felt pressed against. There's one quote from Priscilla that people still bring up. She said, "Elvis told me he could never be intimate with a woman who was a mother." That sentence hits like a hammer. Because it wasn't about love, it was about image. To Elvis, once she became a mother, Priscilla stopped being the fantasy. She became real, and real didn't fit into his vision of romance. Psychologists have a name for this kind of dynamic. It's the Madonna whore complex, when someone idealizes purity so much that they can't connect with their partner after they become sexual or maternal. And Elvis wasn't subtle about it. He had built her up in his mind as this perfect, untouched figure. The minute she stepped into reality, into motherhood, that fantasy crumbled. And so did their physical connection. And still, she stayed for a long time. Maybe it was the weight of expectation. Maybe it was the hope that things would change. But the truth is, Elvis didn't want a partner. He wanted a mirror. A soft, smiling, obedient version of himself reflected back. He didn't know how to love someone he couldn't control. And Priscilla, well, she was still figuring out that love without freedom isn't love at all. From the outside, Priscilla had everything: the mansion, the husband, the fame. People envied her, wanted to be her. She was living with the king, but inside those walls, she was painfully alone. Elvis may have loved her in his own way, but he was deeply broken. His fame didn't make him happy. It made him paranoid. And the bigger he became, the tighter he clung to control. Control over his music, his image, his world, and especially the people in it. Priscilla was the closest to him, and that meant she carried the full weight of his emotional chaos. He had grown up with deep trauma. The early death of his twin brother, the death of his mother, the crushing force of sudden fame. It was too much, too fast, and he never truly healed. So he covered it with bravado, with women, with pills, with power. He became the myth, the king, and he needed everything around him to protect that illusion. Priscilla became part of that illusion. Always perfect, always silent, always smiling. She was told what to wear, how to behave, and most importantly, how to keep quiet. She wasn't just living in Graceland, she was performing in it. And yet she was crumbling. Because it wasn't just about a lack of physical intimacy, it was about not being seen, not being heard. Elvis would shower her with gifts, then disappear emotionally for days. He would bring her into his world, then lock her out the moment she became too real. That's not romance, that's erasure. The world around her kept cheering. Magazines called her lucky. Fans called her beautiful. The illusion was working. But Priscilla later said that she often felt like she was living with a stranger. Someone she loved, someone she feared, someone she couldn't reach no matter how close she was sitting. She once said in an interview, "I was like a bird in a golden cage." That's not just poetic, that's heartbreaking. Because cages aren't always metal. Sometimes they're made of expectations, of fame, of fear, and hers was invisible, but no less suffocating. She tried to be everything he wanted. She sacrificed her identity, her youth, her voice. But no matter how perfect she played the part, it was never enough. Because Elvis didn't want a wife, he wanted a myth to match his own. And the moment Priscilla started becoming real, asking questions, having needs, growing up, the cracks began to show. And here's the real tragedy. Even when she left him, she still defended him. She spoke kindly. She said he wasn't cruel, just lost. And maybe that's true. Maybe he wasn't a villain. Maybe he was just a broken man who didn't know how to let anyone truly love him. But that doesn't make the pain any smaller. So when people say Priscilla lived a dream, it's worth asking, whose dream was it? Because from where she stood, it looked more like a trap. A beautiful one, but a trap all the same. And if we're going to talk about icons like Elvis, then we have to talk about the women behind them. Not as accessories, not as footnotes, but as human beings, with stories, with scars, with strength. Priscilla's story isn't just about Elvis. It's about how easy it is to lose yourself in someone else's legend, and how hard it is to find your way back. For years, Priscilla Presley lived in a house that felt more like a shrine than a home. Every detail was curated by Elvis. Every rule, written by him. From what she wore to when she slept, her world revolved around his orbit. But beneath the makeup, the gowns, and the public smiles, she was unraveling. And when the curtain finally fell, it wasn't a dramatic explosion. It was a quiet, painful realization. Elvis had never truly let her in. The breaking point wasn't just one affair, it was many. Whispers turned into evidence. Tabloids became her reality. She'd given up everything for him, her youth, her identity, her freedom, and in return she got admiration, not affection. Control, not closeness. Elvis had always kept her at arm's length. The myth had to stay intact, and to do that he had to keep her idealized, distant. But over time, Priscilla stopped feeling flattered. She started feeling invisible. What hurt Priscilla most wasn't just the cheating, it was the emotional vacancy that came with it, the silence between them, the way she longed for real connection and never received it. She said in later interviews that she waited and waited for intimacy, not just physical touch, but emotional closeness. She hoped it would come after the wedding. She hoped it would come after the birth of their daughter. But it never did. Instead, Elvis kept her at a distance, locked in an image of perfection. He once told her, "I could never be intimate with a woman who was a mother." That sentence stayed with her like a shadow, painful and lingering. She was loved, yes, but not seen, not felt. He admired her like a statue, not a partner. She became the living doll, groomed, protected, displayed, but never truly held, adored yet untouchable. And slowly, heartbreakingly, she faded behind the glass. Still, even as her world sparkled on the outside, Priscilla wrestled with a deep and quiet guilt. Wanting more, needing more, felt selfish. After all, she had everything others envied: Graceland's gates, global fame, and the love of the most iconic man on the planet. But behind those gates, she was losing something far more precious: herself. She couldn't be spontaneous without judgment. She couldn't cry without being questioned. She couldn't laugh too loud, dress too boldly, or speak too freely. Slowly, the walls closed in. Eventually, she couldn't breathe. The guilt she felt for wanting a life of her own twisted into fear. Fear of disappointing him, of ruining the illusion. That fear morphed into shame. And the shame? It crept into every corner of her life. It dimmed her voice, buried her desires, and made her question her worth. The world saw a fairy tale, but inside she was vanishing by the day. Then something happened that would change everything. Priscilla had her own affair. It shocked her, but more than that, it woke her up. She realized she wasn't dead inside. She still had desire, agency, choice. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't even about love. It was about remembering that she was human, that she could be touched and not just displayed. It wasn't just a secret. It was her soul knocking on the door, begging to be let out. The decision to leave didn't happen overnight. Divorce, especially from someone like Elvis, wasn't simple. But by the early 1970s, Priscilla knew it was over. She was honest. She told him she couldn't live like that anymore. And to his credit, Elvis didn't rage. He wept. They both did. Because even though he couldn't give her what she needed, it didn't mean he didn't love her, in his own broken way. Their divorce was finalized in 1973. Priscilla walked out of the courtroom holding Elvis's hand. It wasn't a performance. It was goodbye. With love, with grief, with everything in between. She later said, "I still loved Elvis very much, but I had to leave." That quote says it all. Sometimes love isn't enough, especially when one person is chasing connection and the other is guarding an illusion. And that's the hardest truth of all. Priscilla didn't leave because she stopped loving him. She left because loving him meant losing herself. And the real tragedy? She was ready to make love to him, not just physically, but emotionally, spiritually. But he wouldn't let her. Because to make love, you have to see the other person fully. And Elvis never truly saw her, only the image he'd created. Priscilla's story isn't just about Elvis, it's about every woman who's ever been put on a pedestal so high she disappeared. About being loved for your looks, your role, your silence, but not for your soul. About living in a mansion but feeling like a ghost. She could have stayed, many do, but she didn't. Priscilla walked away from the most powerful man in music. She gave up the security, the spotlight, the myth, and in doing so, she found something deeper. Herself, her voice, her truth. She raised her daughter. She built her own career. She told her story even when it hurt, because sometimes the greatest act of love is letting go. She said it best, without ever needing to explain it all. Sometimes love isn't a spark, it's a mirror, and what Elvis saw in Priscilla, he couldn't face. If you've ever felt unseen in a relationship, if you've ever loved someone who couldn't love you back the way you needed, this story is for you. Tell us your thoughts in the comments, especially if you've lived through something similar. You're not alone. And you don't have to stay in a cage, no matter how beautiful it looks from the outside. Subscribe for more untold truths from vintage Hollywood, the stories no one dared to say out loud until now.
Stage appearances or when he would go on tour, you couldn't help but fall in love with him.
Don't procrastinate, don't articulate.
He just seemed to have it all. He was every general's soldier. He was every son to every mother. I mean, he just connected. He connected.
When the king of rock and roll leaves his queen in the shadows, invisibility sets in. This isn't just fame or fortune, it's the pain of being unseen by someone who once made you their world. Priscilla Presley felt this ache deeply. One night, before thousands, she made a daring move that stopped Elvis in the crowd, blending romance and humiliation. Yet this act revealed something deeper. Behind Graceland's glamour was a hollow home where Elvis's legend reigned, but his presence was distant. Priscilla's story uncovers the unseen struggle behind the spotlight, challenging what you thought about that infamous moment. Priscilla had been just 14 when she first met Elvis, a teenager swept into a world she didn't understand, orbiting a man whose fame was bigger than life itself. At first, every look he gave her made her feel like she was the only girl in the universe, but that warmth faded. Not all at once, but slowly, over time, like a favorite song that stops giving you chills. As Elvis's career exploded, so did the distance between them. What started as passion began to feel like scheduling. He was everywhere, on TV, on tour, in magazines, but rarely in the same room. And when he was home, it didn't feel like he really was. He'd stay up all night with his entourage, the guys, as Priscilla called them, laughing, playing music, disappearing into rooms that might as well have been galaxies away. She would wait, then go to bed alone, again. Dinners were often skipped, conversation shortened, affection became routine, almost rehearsed. It was like she was living backstage in someone else's show, quietly rehearsing a role she no longer understood. There were little moments, tiny cracks that let the sadness seep in, like the time she spent hours getting ready for a dinner that Elvis canceled without a word, or the way he'd answer her with a smile for his friends, then barely look at her when they were alone. 1,000 small ways to say, "You're here, but I'm not really seeing you." And yet, she stayed. Not because she was weak, but because she loved him. Because she believed, like many of us do, that love could fix the silence. That maybe, just maybe, the next moment would be different. That he'd look up and say something real. But love isn't always loud. Sometimes it's the quiet ache of watching someone you adore slip further away while you sit in the same room. Sometimes it's the slow realization that the spotlight they live under doesn't have room for both of you. People forget. Priscilla didn't grow up in Hollywood. She was a military kid, raised with structure, modesty, rules. She wasn't chasing fame. Fame found her, and then fame left her behind. Her world became a balancing act. Smile for the cameras. Stay poised. Be the perfect wife. But behind closed doors, she was unraveling. Not in scandal, not in rage, but in loneliness. A kind of loneliness that no mansion could cure. She started noticing things. The emotional crumbs she was being fed. The way she had to compete. Not with other women necessarily, but with the image. With Elvis's own legend. How do you stay real in a relationship where one person belongs to millions? There were days when she'd ask herself, what happened to the boy who held my hand in the dark and made me laugh when no one else could? That boy wasn't gone, but he had become a man weighed down by pressure, painkillers, and the expectations of a world that wanted him to keep performing. Always performing. And still, Priscilla tried. She dressed up. She made herself beautiful. She stayed by his side, but her gestures started to feel invisible. No matter how hard she tried, she couldn't compete with the roar of the crowd, the demands of the stage, the chaos of being Elvis. Until one day, something inside her shifted. This wasn't just about being hurt, it was about being erased. She realized she didn't just want to be seen again, she needed it, not for attention, not for glory, but to remind him and maybe herself that she still existed. Which brings us to that moment, that infamous night, the disguise, the stage, the risk. But here's the thing, that wasn't just a prank. It wasn't just a jealous wife pulling a stunt. It was a message built on years of being pushed aside. A final, fearless move by someone who had spent too long waiting in the wings. So let me ask you this. When someone you love stops seeing you, what would you do to be noticed again? This wasn't a last-minute idea. It was a slow, simmering decision, one that built up over weeks, maybe even months. Priscilla had been patient, quiet, careful, but deep inside, something was cracking. And one night, when the loneliness got loud enough, she made a choice. She was going to crash his stage, not with drama, not with anger, but with precision, with style, with just enough risk to wake him up. She didn't tell anyone, not her friends, not his staff. This had to be hers. If she got caught or shut down before she made it to him, so be it. But if it worked, maybe, just maybe, he'd finally look at her like he used to. She chose the dress carefully. A sleek black number that hugged her frame just right. Nothing too flashy, but just daring enough to make someone's breath catch. The back plunged low, scandalously low, and over it she layered her secret weapon, a dark hooded cloak. It made her almost unrecognizable, especially in the chaos of the crowd. She styled her hair so that it draped perfectly down her back, long, thick, covering the dress's thin straps. From a distance, it looked like she was bare. That was the illusion, the bait, the question in the audience's mind. She knew what she was doing, and yet, her hands still trembled as she tied the hood under her chin. The concert was like all the others, blinding lights, thunderous applause, Elvis glowing on stage like a god in motion. Women screamed his name. Security held back crowds that surged forward like waves. It was loud, electric, almost violent in its energy. She stayed back at first, hidden in the mass of bodies swaying and shouting. Her heart beat faster with every passing minute. She told herself she was doing this for fun, for connection, for the thrill. But deep down, she knew better. This wasn't about fun. This was a lifeline. Elvis, in one of his usual flirtatious moments, signaled for women to come up. It was one of his signature bits, a playful kissing ritual where fans would climb the stage for a brief, cheeky kiss. The crowd went wild every time, and this time Priscilla joined them. Step by step, she moved forward, her cloak tight around her, eyes on the man she loved, the man who hadn't really looked at her in months. As she climbed up with the others, something strange happened. Her fear gave way to adrenaline. Her sadness turned into determination. It wasn't just a bold move, it was a declaration. Will he see me now, she asked herself. Not just glance, not just perform. See me. The stage lights made it hard for anyone to truly make out details. The cloak, the hair, the silhouette, it all added to the illusion. She looked almost surreal. Some people in the audience squinted, unsure what they were looking at. And then it started. Little ripples of confusion, whispers, then laughter, then gasps. A few people genuinely thought they were seeing a topless woman on stage with Elvis Presley. Security began shifting. Eyes darted. The crowd wasn't sure if this was part of the act or something slipping off script. From where they stood, the lines were blurry, literally and metaphorically. Elvis hadn't looked up yet. He was still playing his part, microphone in hand, smile polished, voice smooth as velvet. But Priscilla, she was frozen. Not with fear, but with hope. Hope that this risk would pay off, that she would get a flicker of real connection, that for once she'd interrupt the show enough to make it stop. Instead, everything sped up. The crowd's reaction started to change. Some were laughing nervously. Others seemed offended. Some leaned in, waiting for a punchline. It was chaos wrapped in confusion, and she was at the center of it. And still, he didn't look at her. The lights were hot. The music kept playing. Her heart was pounding. Her plan had worked. She had everyone's attention, except his. She leaned closer, whispered, almost begging, "Kiss me." just kiss me so I can sit down." Her voice cracked beneath the calm. Her smile trembled. This wasn't bold anymore. It was exposed, raw, vulnerable. Elvis didn't budge. He didn't yell. He didn't laugh. He didn't even blink. He just kept singing, cool and composed, like she wasn't even there. Like the moment she built with so much care didn't even deserve acknowledgement. It was cruel in its calmness. And maybe that was the worst part. Not the humiliation, not the scandal, but the indifference. The silence from the one person she wanted to hear. She stood there, surrounded by lights and music and strangers, feeling more naked than her disguise could ever suggest. The crowd saw scandal, or comedy, or confusion. But what was it really? Was this bravery or desperation, or both? That's the question no one could answer, except maybe Priscilla herself. And in that moment, frozen on stage, cloaked in mystery, flooded with emotion, she probably didn't know either. Priscilla stood frozen under the spotlight, hot, blinding, and unrelenting, and still he wouldn't look at her. Elvis kept singing. His voice stayed calm and steady, ignoring the turmoil inches away. He didn't flinch or look at her, the man who once lit up at her sight now acting as if she was invisible, the cruelest part. To the crowd, it seemed like a tense joke, but to her it felt like quicksand, erasing her existence. She had risked everything for this moment, hoping for recognition but met with silence and humiliation. The audience laughed and whispered, seeing only drama, while Priscilla was left isolated, heartbreak settling in as she stood alone, unraveling under their gaze. She whispered again, "Kiss me, please. Just kiss me so I can sit down." There was a tremble in her voice now, a kind of plea that doesn't come from vanity. It comes from heartbreak. The crowd couldn't hear her words, but they could feel the tension. And Elvis, still unmoved, he was cool, effortless, in control. That's the thing about Elvis. Even when the moment went off script, he never did. He knew how to hold a room, how to keep the power. And in that moment, he used it. He didn't yell. He didn't confront her. He simply let her wait. One full song. She stood there, his wife, suspended in emotional limbo while the man she loved sang to thousands like she wasn't there. That wasn't just calm. That was control, subtle, surgical control. And when the song finally ended, he didn't scold her. He didn't laugh. He smiled, that smile, the one the world knew so well. Then he turned toward her, reached out gently, and kissed her. A long, dramatic kiss. To the audience, it was a twist, a reveal. That wasn't just some mystery woman. It was Priscilla, the wife. The crowd erupted with cheers, applause, whistles. It was the kind of reaction any performer would crave. He had turned a near scandal into a standing ovation. But what no one saw was her face. Because while the crowd was roaring, Priscilla was crumbling, quietly. Her cheeks burned, not just from the lights, but from the slow realization that she'd been used as part of the act. Her moment of truth had been folded into the performance like just another beat in the show. That kiss wasn't affection, it was punctuation. It ended the scene. It let him walk off clean. Priscilla smiled. What else could she do? But inside, something cracked, because this hadn't been a joke to her. This had been her last chance to reach him, and instead of pulling her close out of love, he let her dangle in front of thousands before claiming the moment as his own. He introduced her to the crowd, finally, as his wife. Not as a punchline, not as a fan. But it didn't matter by then. The damage was already done. That kiss sealed the moment for them, but for her, it was a curtain call she never asked for. She walked back to her seat slowly, heels tapping like a quiet retreat. The audience laughed, clapped, moved on. But for Priscilla, that walk was heavy, the weight of 1,000 unsaid things pressing down with every step. People will say it was playful, that it was just Elvis being Elvis. But those who felt the sting of being unseen by someone they love, they know better. That moment wasn't just a stage prank gone too far. It was a snapshot of their marriage, a dynamic built on silence and spectacle, love wrapped in distance, affection delivered on a schedule. She gave him everything, her youth, her loyalty, her heart, and in return she became part of the performance. This was how it worked. He held the spotlight, she waited in the wings, and when she tried to step forward to rewrite the script, he reminded her, gently, charmingly, but undeniably, who the star was. So yes, the kiss looked sweet, but behind it lived a cold war of emotions, of unmet needs, of unspoken hurt, of a woman desperately trying to matter in a world built around someone else. And maybe that's what makes this story linger. Not the kiss, but everything that came before it. After that night on stage, things didn't magically change. Priscilla wasn't angry, just tired of being invisible. That on-stage kiss didn't fix things, it revealed a deeper truth. Love had become performance. So she stopped waiting. She changed her image, embraced boldness, and wore confidence like armor, not for attention, but to finally be seen. Each dress, each detail, each risk was a message, a question whispered without words. Are you looking now? And sometimes he did look. Sometimes he smiled or gave her that knowing glance. Sometimes his friends even made comments, whistling or teasing, and she'd catch that flicker of pride in Elvis's eyes. For a moment, it felt like winning. But it was complicated. Elvis adored Priscilla, but only on his terms. He was proud of her beauty, yet grew possessive when others noticed. Their relationship became a constant push and pull, affection mixed with control. She learned to play her part, adapting to the role fame demanded. But behind every smile, she felt alone, like a prop in his story. The public gestures, the compliments, they often felt scripted, part of an image, not genuine love. While the world worshipped him, Priscilla quietly held everything together, fading into the background of a life that revolved around a man who belonged more to the crowd than to her. And yet, she stayed. Not because she was weak, but because she had hope. Because every once in a while there was a real moment. A flicker of the man she fell in love with. A soft touch. A private joke. A late-night conversation that reminded her of the boy from Germany who once made her feel like the center of the universe. But those moments were becoming fewer and farther between, and eventually she began to realize that being seen wasn't enough. She needed to be valued, respected, loved for real, not just for show, and that's what that onstage moment had always been about. It wasn't a joke, it wasn't a cry for attention, it was a woman who had been waiting for too long finally stepping into the light, not to steal it, but to remind him that she was still standing there. Because when someone lives for the applause, when they thrive in the eyes of the world, it's easy to forget the person who's clapping the loudest behind the curtain. The one who never asked for fame, only for presence, for connection, for real love. That night on stage wasn't the end of their story, but it was a turning point. A moment that revealed the truth so many couples feel but rarely say out loud, that love without attention, love without effort, starts to feel like absence. And while the world saw the moment as cheeky, funny, maybe even romantic, the reality was much heavier. That kiss might have looked like a happy ending, but to Priscilla, it was the beginning of the end. Not just of a prank, but of a version of herself she could no longer keep pretending to be. Because when affection starts to feel like performance, eventually you stop auditioning. That kiss on stage? Most people remember it as a sweet surprise, a playful moment between a husband and wife. But now you know, it was so much more than that. It was a quiet scream, a last attempt to be seen, a single moment that captured the heartbreak of loving someone who belongs to the world while you're just trying to hold on to what's left of us. Priscilla's story isn't just about Elvis. It's about anyone who's ever stood in the shadow of someone they love, anyone who's tried to keep a connection alive while feeling like they're fading out of frame. Sometimes we make bold moves to feel visible again, and sometimes those moves cost more than we expected. If you've ever loved someone who stopped looking, if you've ever made a risky choice hoping to bring them back, you're not alone. If this story made you feel something, hit that like button. Subscribe for more untold truths behind the legends we think we know, and in the comments tell us. Was Priscilla's move a moment of courage or heartbreak, or maybe both?
Oh my gosh, I think that they know so much about him. I was thinking about that. And one of the things that Elvis did, first of all, when he was young, he never liked to go to people's homes or eat because he didn't like eating with other people's silverware.
Priscilla Presley never needed to say much for the world to listen. But this time, what she said wasn't just listened to, it sent shockwaves rippling through decades of music history, celebrity culture, and everything we thought we knew about one man, Elvis Presley. Her words were simple, almost casual, but loaded with a gravity that couldn't be ignored. Bob Joyce, she said, is my ex-husband Elvis. Just like that, a decades-long myth took a sharp turn into something far more real. You've heard whispers, maybe you've even laughed them off. The sightings, the videos, the strange similarities. But this was different. When the person closest to the king of rock and roll leans in and drops a sentence like that, the world doesn't shrug it off. It leans in closer. Because we all feel it, don't we? That question that never fully went away. What if Elvis never actually died? What if the man we buried in 1977 simply vanished behind the curtain and started a quieter, more meaningful life? One without the crowds, the chaos, or the crushing expectations. You don't have to be a conspiracy theorist to be curious. You just have to be human. After all, the story never quite added up. A bathroom collapse, sealed reports, questions unanswered. People grieved, but they also wondered. He was too big to disappear quietly. And yet, he did. Or did he? Let's go back for a moment. August 16th, 1977. The world gasped. The headlines screamed. Elvis Presley was dead at 42. But from day one, fans pushed back. The inconsistencies in the autopsy, the oddly handled funeral, the strange misspelling of his middle name on the gravestone, Aaron instead of Aaron. The idea that someone of his status with his resources could orchestrate an exit from fame, it didn't feel impossible. It felt strangely plausible. And then, years later, a name started popping up in small-town conversations and niche online threads. Bob Joyce, a pastor, a man with a commanding voice, a striking presence, and a demeanor that was eerily familiar. People weren't just saying he looked like Elvis. They said he sounded like him. Deep, soulful, unmistakable. Not like an impersonator, not like a tribute act, like the real thing. It wasn't long before the videos started circulating. Grainy church recordings, clips of Bob speaking, singing, moving in a way that stirred something in lifelong Elvis fans. They weren't reaching, they were remembering. The way he held a note, the soft half smile, the rhythm in his gestures. It was like catching a glimpse of a ghost who decided to stick around. And it wasn't just the voice, the eyes, the posture, the way he carried the weight of his presence. Gentle, magnetic, always a little outside the moment. It was uncanny. The internet did what the internet does. It pulled threads. Voice overlays comparing Bob Joyce's sermons with Elvis's old ballads. Side-by-side photos dissecting jawlines and eye crinkles. Interviews analyzed like crime scene footage. And yet, through it all, Bob never said much. He never claimed anything, but more tellingly, he never denied it outright either. He simply lived his life, as if the truth, whatever it was, didn't need to be spoken to be known. And then came Priscilla, the one woman on this planet who could end the speculation with a single sentence. For years, she stayed silent, respectfully distant, but when asked directly about Bob Joyce, her response wasn't a dismissal. It wasn't even neutral. It was ambiguous. Deliberately so. People see what they want to see, she said, her voice measured. Her eyes didn't roll. Her mouth didn't smirk. And if you watched closely, you saw it too. Something just beneath the surface. A glimmer of withheld truth. Or maybe protection. You don't always need a direct answer to understand the truth. Sometimes the absence of denial speaks louder than any confirmation could. And when it came to Priscilla Presley, her history with Elvis, her careful choice of words, her lingering silences, people didn't need her to say it outright. They heard what wasn't said. They saw what wasn't denied. The way she paused, the way her eyes seemed to flicker with memory, it was like watching someone protect a secret that didn't want to be broken. Not to deceive, but to preserve something sacred. For those who still carried Elvis in their hearts, that was more than enough. It wasn't about chasing headlines or fueling wild rumors. It was about permission. Permission to imagine a version of the story where Elvis didn't fade under the weight of fame, but quietly stepped out of its grasp. Her silence wasn't avoidance. It felt like an open invitation. A door not fully closed and maybe not entirely open either. Just enough to make people wonder, what if he didn't die but chose peace? What if the king didn't disappear? He just stepped into a life finally his own. Because who else but Priscilla would know the price Elvis paid behind the velvet ropes and camera flashes? She watched him unravel in ways the public never saw, felt the weight of his silence when the cheers died down, when the lights dimmed and the loneliness took hold. Fame gave him everything, and yet left him hollow in places that love alone couldn't fill. Priscilla was there through the highs that made history and the lows that nearly broke him. She understood that under the crown and glitter was a man who sometimes just wanted to be invisible, to breathe without being watched, to exist without being worshipped. So when she spoke, even in fragments, about his quiet yearning for something simpler, it resonated. Not as some romantic notion, but as a reflection of who Elvis really was beneath the performance. That aching desire to disappear wasn't cowardice. It was clarity. He wasn't running from the world. He was reaching for himself. And when you hear Bob Joyce speak, when you see the serenity in his posture, the steadiness in his voice, you stop asking, could it be? And start thinking, of course it would be. Because if Elvis found peace, it would look a lot like this. Fame doesn't knock politely. It bursts in, uninvited, and rearranges your life in ways you can never quite take back. Elvis didn't just perform for the crowd, he belonged to them. Every smile became public property, every stumble a headline. He couldn't grieve, couldn't rest, couldn't even walk into a diner without becoming a spectacle. What began as love from millions slowly hardened into a cage built from their expectations. And once you're a symbol, there's no room left for the softness of being human. People don't want your doubts or fatigue, they want the legend, always glowing, always available. So he gave until there was nothing left to give. Stage after stage, interview after interview, a life so public it stopped feeling like his own. And in the quiet moments between performances, when the lights were off and the crowds were gone, he was left with a question most of us never have to ask. What if the only way to survive is to disappear? Because even the brightest star eventually burns out, unless it finds a way to step out of the sky entirely. Maybe that's what Elvis saw. Not an escape from fans, but a return to himself. What if the choice wasn't about hiding, but healing? What if, after years of being everything to everyone, Elvis just wanted to be something to himself? Not the king, not the icon, just a man with a voice and a heart that still had something to offer, but on his own terms. Imagine trading arenas for a church pew, flashbulbs for stained glass. Imagine the relief of walking into a room and not being recognized as a spectacle, but welcomed as a soul. That kind of anonymity isn't loss, it's liberation. To sing because it moves you, not because it sells. To speak because there's something worth saying, not because someone handed you a script. There's something sacred about that shift, something deeply human. Maybe that's what Bob Joyce represents to so many people. A version of Elvis that finally found rest, not in death, but in stillness. Not erased, but redefined. It's not about running from the world. It's about finally being still long enough to hear your own voice again. And maybe, just maybe, that voice never really left. It just changed where it chose to echo. Think about it. Bob Joyce lives simply. He preaches. He sings. He smiles warmly and leaves the past untouched. He has the same birth year Elvis would have, the same Southern roots, the same sense of grace wrapped in weariness. The pieces line up like puzzle fragments that never fully faded, and each time he speaks, another piece slides into place. And still, the skeptics scoff. Coincidences, they say. Tricks of the mind. People see what they want to see. And maybe they're right. But tell me this, when was the last time something this wild was just a coincidence? The fans haven't let go. In fact, they've dug deeper. They slow down his sermons, isolate vowels and syllables, compare them to recordings from 50 years ago. They watch Priscilla's interviews like court depositions, analyzing pauses, micro-expressions, intonations. They aren't just watching, they're believing, because it's not about facts anymore. It's about faith. And what's fascinating is how this belief isn't desperate or delusional. It's almost comforting. The idea that the man who gave so much, who burned so brightly, might have found a second act, not in the spotlight, but in its shadow. Not in the roar of applause, but in the quiet peace of a Sunday morning. It's poetic, almost biblical. The king reborn as a pastor, the showman turned shepherd. And maybe the most powerful evidence of all is this. Bob Joyce doesn't fight it. He doesn't try to squash the rumors. He doesn't call press conferences to clear his name. He simply lives. Calmly, humbly, like a man who's already told his story and now chooses silence. Or maybe he's telling a new story, just with fewer words. So when Priscilla says things like, sometimes the past has a way of finding its own voice, people listen. Not because she's confirming anything, but because she's not denying it. She's not shutting it down. She's guiding it, like someone curating the myth without dismantling it. Her tone isn't defensive. It's gentle, protective, and maybe, just maybe, it's loving. The idea that Elvis could have escaped fame and found peace, that he could have simply stepped away without asking anyone's permission, cuts deeper than any wild conspiracy ever could. It doesn't need to be sensational to be powerful. It speaks to something we all long for in our own way, the chance to reclaim ourselves. This isn't about vanishing with a wink or outsmarting the world. It's about quietly choosing healing over performance, wholeness over fame. About a man who had been everything to everyone and finally decided to be something to himself. We've been told the tragic version so many times, Elvis isolated, addicted, worn out by the very people who adored him. That version fits the mythology of a fallen icon, but maybe it misses the truth of the man. There's something incredibly moving about imagining him not collapsing beneath the weight of his own legend, but rising above it, not in front of cameras, but far away from them. That he didn't disappear out of fear, but out of clarity. That after all he gave, his youth, his privacy, his health, he finally kept something for himself. What if he didn't need to be the king anymore? What if the music was still in him, but the need for recognition was gone? In that picture, he's not a shadow of his former self. He's more complete than ever. Singing, not to fill stadiums, but to connect souls. Speaking, not to entertain, but to guide. There's a gentleness in that image, and it feels more honest than any story tabloids could print. It's not about legacy. It's about letting go of the weight that legacy carries. And maybe that's what makes this version of the story linger in people's hearts. Because in the end, it's not about whether Elvis fooled the world, it's about whether he finally stopped needing to please it and started living for something real. And as the theories swirl, as grainy videos are paused and voices compared, there's an unexpected comfort in not knowing for sure. Because maybe certainty was never the point. Maybe Elvis never intended for anyone to solve the puzzle. Maybe what he wanted, more than applause, more than admiration, was space to simply exist. Not as a spectacle, not as an icon, but as a man. A man allowed to grow older without scrutiny, to feel joy without an audience, to finally be free of the weight of being Elvis and allowed at last to just be himself. It's easy to get caught up in trying to prove it, to line up facts and analyze phrases, but sometimes the most meaningful truths are the ones we feel. not the ones we can confirm. And when you listen to Bob Joyce speak, when you see the calm in his face, the quiet depth in his eyes, it stirs something. It's not just about likeness, it's about energy, presence, that rare, intangible essence of someone who has carried more than they ever said out loud and still found peace on the other side. Some people dismiss it, call it coincidence. But for others, that resemblance isn't just physical, it's spiritual. Like the soul of the king didn't vanish, it just shifted. Maybe into a quieter rhythm, maybe into a gentler purpose. And maybe when people listen to Bob, they aren't just hearing a man, they're hearing echoes. Echoes of a voice that once changed music forever, now speaking a different kind of truth. Whether it's real or imagined, it gives people something profoundly human to hold on to. Not proof, but permission. To revisit the past, to keep the memory alive, to believe, even in whispers, that maybe legends don't fade the way we think they do. Maybe they don't end at all. Maybe they just find a quieter stage. And if Elvis truly did find a way to escape the clutches of his fame, to slip away from the glare and the pressure, and into a life that finally felt like his own, wouldn't that be the ending he always deserved? Not the one in the headlines or the hospital reports, but something softer. Something earned. A quiet triumph after years of noise. He gave the world everything he had, piece by piece, until there was barely anything left for himself. So maybe, just maybe, his final act wasn't a tragic fall, but a quiet choice to begin again. We may never know the whole truth. And that's not just acceptable, it might be necessary. Because sometimes the power of a story isn't in the facts we can nail down, but in the spaces in between, in the questions we're still asking, in the conversations we're still having. It's the uncertainty that breathes life into the legend. Not as something frozen in time, but as something still unfolding in quiet corners of the world. A voice, a glance, a memory that refuses to disappear. And maybe that's why this story stays with us. Not because we need it to be true, but because it gives us permission to keep feeling connected to a sound, a soul, a symbol of something bigger than fame. Possibility makes room for hope, and hope keeps the king alive in ways no photograph or biography ever could. So now it's your turn to wonder, could Bob Joyce really be Elvis, quietly living out the life he once only dreamed of? Or is this just a story we've crafted, one last ballad we sing to ourselves to keep his spirit nearby? Maybe the real answer is somewhere in between, and maybe that's where legends live. Either way, the question doesn't go away. It hangs there quietly, like the last note of a song that never fully fades. What if Elvis never truly left the building, just the spotlight? What if the man who once lit up stadiums decided to light something else? A room, a soul, a different kind of stage. The idea lingers not because it demands to be solved, but because it speaks to something deeper in us. We don't want to believe our heroes vanish. We want to believe they find peace, that they evolve, that somewhere out of view, their story continues in ways we can't fully see, but still somehow feel. Maybe that's what keeps this story alive. Not proof, but possibility. The sense that the king didn't disappear, he just changed his rhythm, slowed the tempo, found a softer melody to carry him forward. And maybe we listen even now, not to uncover him, but to stay close. We'd love to hear what you think. Could Bob Joyce really be Elvis living under a new name, or is it simply the comfort of a beautiful idea? If this story stirred something in you, take a moment to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts below. Let's keep the conversation going.